Good morning. Welcome to Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. Thanks for tuning in this morning. We're going to continue our reading and discussion about the presidency of Barack Hussein Obama and his connection with the Vatican and what this bodes for the United States, God's people in the United States. We're going to begin by backing up a paragraph or two for continuity purposes. If you're following along in the book, we're at the bottom of page 373. It says, President Obama is connected to the Vatican, not only through his previous Jesuit mentor, Gregory Galuzzo, and by his many years of working for the Catholic Church in Chicago, but also through his foreign policy advisors, Zbigniew Brzezinski, via the Rockefellers, via the Rothschilds, remember, the guardians of the Vatican Treasury. Indeed, since Barack Obama was mentored by Jesuits, it's not a stretch to say that he may well be one of their agents, for as one ex-pupil of the Jesuits who had studied under them for 8 years said of his former masters, quote, the objectives of the disciples of Loyola, also known as the Jesuits, is to acquire the highest offices of state for the men they have poisoned with their maxims, unquote. And the Italian scholar and former priest, Professor Paolo Sarpi, observed, quote, the Roman Catholic Church is a political conspiracy, unquote. And now I'll remind the listeners that the very reason for the Jesuit order's existence is to destroy the Protestant Reformation, to destroy any knowledge that the papacy is... I'm sorry, I must be having connection problems this morning. I was just reiterating that the Jesuit order was created for no other purpose than to destroy the Protestant Reformation and any knowledge that the papacy is the biblical and historical Antichrist, and to raise the papacy to world supremacy, global governance, to make the Pope the king and the God of this world. And that's precisely what this is all about. Now, we're going to continue our discussion where we left off yesterday at the top of page 374, and talk about some of Barack Obama's friends. It's entitled, Obama's Friend Desecrates the American Flag. In 2008, presidential campaign William Ayers, a 60s, 70s version of Timothy McVeigh, and now a distinguished professor of education at the University of Illinois at Chicago, became a household name when it was disclosed that he had worked closely with Obama for years. The explosive disclosure that Ayers had helped launch Obama's political career with a fundraising event in his home, Ayers' home. It was also revealed that Obama had served on the board of a Chicago nonprofit alongside with Mr. Ayers, and it says, what is more, Ayers later hired Obama to serve as chairman of the Chicago Annenberg Challenge, a job Obama later cited as, quote, the experience that helped him qualify to run for public office, unquote. Why is any of this important? Bill Ayers and his girlfriend, Bernardine Dorn, were two of the main founders of a homegrown terrorist organization called Weather Underground that bombed the New York police headquarters in the New York City police headquarters in 1970 and the Capitol, the U.S. Capitol in 1971 and the Pentagon in 1972. The group was proved to be responsible for some 30 bombings aimed at destroying the defense and security infrastructures of the United States, including bombing courthouses, banks, police barracks, and National Guard outposts. The organization's campaign of terror only came to an end when a bomb that they were constructing in Greenwich Village exploded, killing 3 of Ayers' fellow weathermen. The device, which was packed with boxes of carpenter nails, supposedly to inflict maximum human damage, was meant for a dance hall attended by soldiers and their dates at Fort Dix. David Farber of the Chicago Tribune wrote of this latter incident, quote, it almost surely was intended to kill many people, unquote. Yet Barack Obama announced his candidacy for the Illinois Senate in 1995 at Ayers' house. Why would Barack Obama be friends with someone who bombed the U.S. Capitol and is proud of it, and when, according to reports by the U.S. government, the aims of Ayers and the Weather Underground was the violent overthrow of the United States government and the establishment of a dictatorship? Why, reader? While still a U.S. Senator, Barack Obama acknowledged that he had been friendly with Bill Ayers since the mid-1990s and that he had worked with Ayers on various Chicago anti-poverty and education projects. But there's more. In the 2001 New York Times interview mentioned earlier, Ayers is seen posing in a photograph accompanying an article showing him standing on an American flag. He said this of the United States, quote, what a country. It makes me want to puke, unquote. We ask again, why would Barack Obama, as a United States Senator and now United States President, maintain connections with such a vile and nefarious character? Interestingly, WorldNet Daily columnist Jack Cashill has also produced evidence that he says proves it was William Ayers who ghostwrote Obama's award-winning autobiography entitled Dreams from My Father, unquote. Only 9 years ago, referring to the Weather Underground organization as, quote, an American Red Army, unquote, Ayers unashamedly recalled in his 2001 memoirs entitled Fugitive Days, quote, the sky was blue, the birds were singing, and the bastards were finally going to get what was coming to them, unquote. Again, in 2001, Ayers gave a notorious interview with the New York Times published one day after the 9/11 attacks, in which he stated, quote, I don't regret setting bombs. I feel we didn't do enough, unquote. Little wonder that the FBI once called Ayers and his organization, quote, the most dangerous radicals in America, unquote. Again, I ask, why would Barack Obama choose to foster and maintain close connections with such a vicious and violent character? I have to ask the question, is the United States government planning eventually to place the blame for 9/11 on Mr. Ayers and Bernardine Dorn? Obviously, our government will never tell us the truth about 9/11. The book continues. It says, reader, I have one more question. If the Weatherman Underground and Ayers have expressly admitted to the bombings, why hasn't Ayers, as leader of that organization, spent a single day in jail? I would ask, does he have a dispensation from his priest? Does he have plenary indulgence? If any one of us were to do the crimes that Bill Ayers did, we'd be pounding rocks till we ran out of rocks. Bill Ayers is free. And the author says, well, forgive me, but permit me to ask, quote, why would a decent, self-respecting, loyal American like President Barack Obama ever consider being so closely associated with and working for this homegrown terrorist who kills and maims Americans and steps on, even desecrates the American flag? A penny for your thoughts, Mr. Obama? But I must ask yet another question, as put by freelance journalist Victor Thorne, quote, of the 300 million people living in America, why would Barack Obama announce his candidacy for the Illinois Senate in the home of William Ayers, and why would he continue his relationship with him into the future? That might be the biggest Obama bomb of all, unquote. Reader, it's my firm conviction, says the author, that Mr. Obama, like President George W. Bush, is now a key part in a political conspiracy. And we already know what Sarpi said about this political conspiracy, that the Vatican is a political conspiracy to put Rome back in the ascendancy. And from all appearances, it would seem that Barack Obama has been installed, jobbed into office to fulfill a particular agenda. I believe this to be more than mere conjecture. What that agenda is, we shall shortly consider, but take note of this term, rerum novarum, R-E-R-U-M, N-O-V-A-R-U-M, rerum novarum, for its principles will loom large in the very near future. As the proverb says, forewarned is forearmed. Rerum novarum is a papal encyclical, and we'll talk about it more on this program in a future date. We'll continue with the text of the book. It says, I'm reminded of the words of the great Cicero, that other orator, statesman, and lawyer of renown, who had this to say of such men, speaking of Barack Obama. Quote, a nation can survive its fools, and the author adds in parentheses, Bush Jr., and ambitious, and in parentheses, Bill Clinton, but it cannot survive treason from within. An enemy at the gates is less formidable, for he is known and carries his banner openly, but the traitor moves amongst those within the gate freely. His sly whispers rustling through all the alleys, heard in the very halls of government itself. For the traitor appears not a traitor. He speaks in accents familiar to his victims, and he wears their face and their garments. He appeals to the baseness that lies deep in the hearts of all men. He rots the soul of a nation. He works secretly and unknown in the night to undermine the pillars of the city. He infects the body politic so that it can no longer resist. A murderer is less to fear. The traitor is the plague. That from Marcus Tullius Cicero, speaking about the traitor, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, and George W. Bush. And I would add Ronald Wilson Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Papists, every last one of them. And the United States people, the American people, are having difficulty finding out and discovering and admitting that what's going on in our government is that the papacy is controlling it. Now, chapter 56 is entitled September 11th, the National Security versus Individual Freedoms in the New World Order. It begins with a powerful quote from a former Supreme Court Justice, Louis D. Brandeis, one that is particularly precious to me just now, given all of the malicious interference, willful and malicious interference that I've been receiving on amateur radio in my attempts to talk about this Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order by an amateur radio operator with a call sign November 1 Fox Mike, a former Florida police detective who has made me a project who doesn't want me talking on amateur radio anymore, a very familiar person in Florida, Thomas Whatley, November 1, Fox Mike. This quote from his former Supreme Court Justice Louis D. Brandeis. Listen carefully, Tom, if you're listening. The right to be let alone is the most comprehensive of rights and the right most valued by civilized men. That from the case entitled Olmstead versus United States, 1928, 277 U.S. 438 and 478. Look it up, Tom. Willful and malicious interference. I wish to be left alone to exercise my First Amendment rights to inform and alert the American people on amateur radio about this Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, and I won't be stopped by you or anyone else. Now, another anonymous quote. How does one take over control of the currency of a nation? By engineering financial crises, wars, and national calamities. And that's exactly what has been done. The author begins by saying the secret government had long sought a means, or rather an excuse, to bring in the first phase of the New World Order, quote, initiated, unquote, by Pope John Paul II, and September 11, 2001 gave them that excuse. As the reader will recall earlier, I referred to the official United States government video in which the then U.S. Senator Gary Hart can be heard saying just one day after 9/11 that President Bush had the opportunity to, quote, use this September 11th disaster to carry out what his father, Bush Sr., mentioned, and that is a new world order, unquote. September 11, 2001 was a major phase of the millennial endgame spoken of by Jesuit Professor Malachi Martin in his book, The Keys of This Blood. It contained the atmosphere that was required for the unopposed introduction of modern fascism. I would call it global popery. But nonetheless, leading American academic Patricia Williams has said that the laws passed after September 11th, quote, mirror the worst excesses of some dictatorships, unquote. And Andrew P. Napolitano, a name that should be very, very familiar to many of my listeners, let me just remind you who he is. He's the very handsome, Italian-looking Roman Catholic who is the judiciary consultant for Fox News. Andrew P. Napolitano, they call him Judge Napolitano, a devout Roman Catholic trained at Notre Dame. He's a Mariolater and a judiciary consultant for Knight of St. Gregory run Fox News in New York. And it says, Andrew P. Napolitano, a 59-year-old former New Jersey Superior Court judge, had this to say about the United States lawmakers of the Patriot Act. Now, he's going to talk about the inquisitorial Roman Catholic canon law under the cover of patriotism. The Patriot Act. Here's what Judge Napolitano says about it. Congress recognizes no limits on its power. It doesn't care about the Constitution. It doesn't care about your inalienable rights, unquote. Reader, this Catholic judge has admitted that the most glaring assault on American freedoms comes from a Jesuit-crafted law known as the USA Patriot Act, passed by Congress and signed into law by George W. Bush on October 15, 2001, quote, while the rubble of 9/11 still smoldered, unquote, as someone commented. Apparently, P.D. Stewart, the author of this book, is a frequent listener to Inquisition Update. This deceptively named Patriot Act is being used against the very American citizens it was supposed to protect. Under this dark age monstrosity, isn't it interesting, the choice of words that P.D. Stewart uses here? Under this dark age monstrosity, FBI agents can serve self-written search warrants and then enter your home, your barn, search your car, etc., without any prior court authorization. Unquote. Now this, P.D. Stewart refers to as a dark age monstrosity, and he's absolutely right. This was the strategy used by the Inquisitors during the Dark Ages. This was the strategy used by the Papacy and the kings over which he ruled. You had no rights. Law enforcement, the civil power it was referred to, could come into your home and do anything they wanted, anytime, without any search warrants, no rights whatsoever. The rights that we enjoy in this country were given to us by the Protestant reformers. We can credit all of our liberties, our very Constitution and our Bill of Rights, to the Protestant reformers who saw fit to protect us from papal tyranny, to expose it. And the people who founded our nation and wrote our Constitution at least gave lip service to the Protestant reformers by giving us our Bill of Rights, their Protestant liberties, as contradistinction between Protestantism and the Dark Ages of papal tyranny. The Patriot Act rolls back the calendar 500 to 1,000 of even 1,500 years. The Patriot Act reimposes papal tyranny as exercised through its cooperative third party, the secular power. And Protestantism and Protestant liberties is the target of the Patriot Act. Now, continuing, it says, Congress, with minimal floor debate in the Senate and no floor debate in the House, enacted this most inquisitorial, again, an appropriately descriptive term, this most inquisitorial, popish kind of law, and had the nerve, the very audacity, if you please, to call it the Patriot Act. Do you know how the Pope defines patriotism? Those who are loyal to the Pope, loyal to the biblical Antichrist. That's patriotism to the Pope. And patriotism to the Pope is also taking away the rights of those who claim that he is Antichrist. Now, the author continues, he says, in 2004, this law produced two offsprings, the Intelligence Authorization Act and the Intelligence Reform Act of 2004, both of which permit the execution of self-written search warrants. And if any of my listeners have been listening for any length of time and are aware of the modus operandi of the Inquisition during the Dark and Middle Ages, what a wonderful asset that law enforcement now can just roll out on the hood of their automobiles and write their own authorizations to come in and ransack your house, take your computer hard drive, take anything else they want from the house in the name of evidence, and haul you off to prison and hold you indefinitely, deny you legal representation, and let you rot there if they want to. Welcome back to the Dark Ages. We'll be back right after this. While the Twin Towers were a smoking hole in the ground, we got the Patriot Act. Not 3 years later, we got two of its offsprings, the Intelligence Authorization Act and the Intelligence Reform Act, thrusting us back 1,000 years in time when law enforcement, the civil power, could write their own search warrants, bust into your house and violate all your rights, hold you indefinitely, and let you rot if that's what they wanted to do. No rights whatsoever. Nowadays, the black thugs, the blackjack booted thugs, the American police and law enforcement officers can write their own search warrants. They don't have to present probable cause to a judge and get permission from the court. They simply write their own authorization. The inquisitors now have free use to come into your house anytime they want for any pretense, real or imagined. Go through your personal effects, roust you out of your bed, and take you without reading you your rights, put you in a prison, deny you legal representation, and use and abuse you however they see fit. Welcome back to the days of papal supremacy. Now, the author continues, he says, writes Andrew P. Napolitano, still talking about Judge Napolitano, a self-written search warrant, he says, even one called a national security letter, is the ultimate constitutional farce. What federal agents would not authorize themselves to, what federal agents would not authorize themselves to seize whatever they wished. Why would government agents bother going to a judge with probable cause seeking a search warrant if they can simply write their own? Federal agents have written and executed self-written search warrants on over 120,000 unsuspecting Americans since October of 2001. You know what I call them? Dirty cops. Just like Thomas Whatley. Thomas Whatley, a former Florida police detective who pursues me on amateur radio every night and sees to it that I cannot conduct any lawful communications about the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order. He's exempt from the law. He's exempt from the rules and regulations of amateur radio and may willfully and maliciously interfere with all of my transmissions, even so far as to give his call sign and to express his intent to maliciously interfere. And he gets by with it, year in, year out. Where's the FCC? Where is the the Amateur Radio Relay League and their official observers? They're all in bed together. The author continues, he says, the Patriot Act is the most unpatriotic of things that the Bush administration and Congress could have visited upon us, unquote, Judge Napolitano added. But interestingly, what Judge Napolitano does not seem to realize is that this is the very code under which the Roman Catholic Inquisition operated. He forgets, too, that the Patriot Act was drafted by a professor of the Jesuit Georgetown University, and I've spoken about this often. His name was Viet Dinh. He was a Vietnamese Roman Catholic refugee to this country. He was hustled through a Jesuit education. He was made a Jesuit professor at Georgetown University, and he was also made the assistant U.S. attorney under John Ashcroft, the ecumenical singer. And it was Viet Dinh who produced the Patriot Act at Georgetown University. And I've been told since my own research from another researcher that Viet Dinh is a cousin of the No Din Diem regime that was put in place in Vietnam by Cardinal Spellman. It was the Viet Dinh family, the No Din Diem regime, that waged a Holy Roman Inquisition against the Buddhists in Vietnam. Here we have now a cousin of that regime under John Ashcroft as assistant U.S. Attorney General, a Georgetown Jesuit professor producing the Patriot Act, which I insist, if anyone reads it and compares it with history, is nothing but Roman Catholic canon law under the cover of patriotism. It's in your face. It's researchable information. The papacy is waging war on this country, and they're using our own government to do it. Judge Napolitano is only scratching the surface. Now, Judge Napolitano is a devout Roman Catholic who studied at Jesuit Notre Dame University. The word Notre Dame is French for Our Lady, referring to Mary. You know, the goddess, the pagan goddess of Roman Catholicism. In a 2008 interview with Celebrate Life magazine, Judge Napolitano said, quote, "We should go to Our Lady, the Blessed Mother. Not a mass should be said without reference to her. Not a war should be waged. Not a prayer should be uttered. Not a contact should be sought without her assistance," unquote. This reader must qualify as a candidate for quote of the decade. "It certainly left me scratching my head," says P.D. Stewart. "It's just strange how such zealous Roman Catholics can be intelligent on almost every subject other than their own religion." But more on that later. Not content with the Patriot Act, Mr. Bush enacted the Military Commissions Act of 2006, which effectively ended habeas corpus, another Protestant protection from papal tyranny, the right to an attorney when charged, and to have a court review of one's detention and arrest. Without this latter right, all other rights are effectively undermined, as anyone can now be detained indefinitely and no one needs know about it. They would just go missing. Welcome to Papist USA. Still, Mr. Bush was not done. Before leaving office, he passed National Security Presidential Directive 51, directly signed by Bush on May 9, 2007, that with the stroke of his pen allows any U.S. president to declare martial law, effectively transforming the United States into a dictatorship. Mr. Bush even had parts of National Security Presidential Directive 51 classified, so that members of Congress are denied the right to review it. Bush next passed the Protect America Act of 2007 that allows domestic wiretapping and surveillance activities, and with the reduction of the FISA court oversight. Under this law, probable cause of being a terrorist is no longer required. In other words, our government can just call us a domestic terrorist, and they don't have to answer to anybody. Gone are our Protestant protections. Returned is papal tyranny, and it's being exercised against God's people, as always in the past, by the civil power, by the government of our own country. Another law, the John Warner Defense Authorization Act, signed by Mr. Bush on October 17, 2007, allows the United States President to declare a public emergency and station troops anywhere in America without the consent of the governor or local authorities to suppress public disorder. In other words, your tax dollars go to provide the best ammunition and equipment and technology to our military forces. And now the President of the United States, answering to the Pope of Rome and to no one else, can use your taxpayer-funded military against you. Again, a violation of Protestant liberty. He can dispatch military troops anywhere in America without the consent of the state governor or local authorities, merely to suppress public disorder. This by means of a raft of post-9/11 legislation, the Protestant constitutional rights of Americans have been systematically dismantled. Let me include, Protestantism is being systematically dismantled in this country. The Protestant tenets of our Constitution are being eroded by our government. The Protestant beliefs, religious beliefs of Protestants are being dismantled by the ecumenical movement. Protestantism is the target on every side. And what was it said in the Jesuit oath? That they would extirpate and annihilate Protestantism wherever it is found in the world. Might we take that oath more seriously and use it to help understand what is going on in this country? One law after another, all in the name of national security. Another curious set of facts is what occurred soon after 9/11. The United States government, it would appear, took no effective steps to catch the alleged mastermind behind 9/11. Remember, they told us it was the bin Laden family. He says this is demonstrated by what happened to the bin Ladens living in the United States a few days after 9/11 attacks, when a Learjet 35 twice flew in and out of Tampa International Airport in violation of federal no-fly restrictions. Among the passengers on that aircraft were members of the bin Laden family. Members of the bin Laden family. Now, let me tell you something. If you're serious about your research into 9/11, you'll find out bin Laden had about as much to do with 9/11 as I did. Okay? And his moving in and out of Tampa International Airport during the federally imposed no-fly restriction was to draw emphasis on the bin Laden's freedom to fly in and out of this country. It was a smokescreen to get the American people to believe that the bin Laden family had anything to do with 9/11. They were a scapegoat. They were a voluntary scapegoat. I believe they were in cahoots with the federal government of this country to draw attention away from our own government. George W. Bush, Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and the whole Papist crew. And gave this country the pretense to go on another Holy Roman crusade to conquer those in the Middle East who simply don't want any part of the Vatican Jesuit-led New World Order, the Shia sect of Islam, and to accomplish what Zbigniew Brzezinski said in his book, The Grand Chessboard. Anybody who's ever going to control the world must control the Caspian Sea region, the landlocked region located in that area of the world occupied by all the stands. Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, you've heard them all. And the bin Ladens, the accusation that the bin Laden family had anything to do with 9/11 just got the American people ready to go on another Holy Roman crusade to fulfill Zbigniew Brzezinski's expansionist Pax Americana. The United States is a papal proxy warrior and is doing nothing but securing the Middle East for an eventual reign of the Pope as the global governor of the world, and from Mount Moriah in Jerusalem. And as we discussed with Nicholas Arthur not long ago on one Inquisition Update program, the Vatican has announced it wants a Vatican-type independent city-state enclave within the old city of Jerusalem. That's right, another Vatican City right in the old city of Jerusalem. An autonomous city-state where the Pope rules supreme, and you know that the whole intent of that is to put the Pope the governor and priest king of the world and put him on Temple Mount for this new world order. The biblical Antichrist. And in all of this, they're going to try to fulfill this phony futurist interpretation of Daniel chapter 9 and verse 24 through 27. And I just hope and pray that God will inspire the listeners to do their research in the Bible and in history and to come to their own conclusions independent of Inquisition Update and prove by diligent study and prayer exactly what Rome is attempting to do. But it can hardly be denied by anybody that the papacy has co-opted the government of this country to conduct its papal proxy wars in the Middle East. Too much of it has been uncovered, and we're reading about these today in this book, Codeword Barbelon by P.D. Stewart. It says authorities at the Tampa International Airport initially denied that the flights had taken place. Speaking of these Learjet 35 departures from Tampa International Airport by the bin Laden families. Initially, they denied that they even took place. Gene Heller of the St. Petersburg Times wrote in June of 2004 that the White House aviation and law enforcement officials have insisted the flights never took place and have denied published reports and widespread internet speculation about its purpose. But now, at the request of the National Commission on Terrorist Attacks, Tampa International Airport officials have confirmed that the flights did take place and have supplied details, unquote. You see what they did? They just drew everyone's attention to these flights of the bin Laden family in and out of Tampa during the no-fly restrictions in this country to draw emphasis and put the spotlight on the bin Laden family. It was all part of the plan. And it says, yet another lie foisted upon the American people by officialdom. You just as well have said popedom. Did the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the CIA investigate the bin Laden family as part of the crackdown of financing or involvement in the global terrorism before allowing them to leave the United States? No, says the author. At the time, the bin Laden family had extensive investments in the United States, and it was not improbable that they could have secretly funneled millions of dollars to bin Laden's operatives inside and outside of America. Yet every member of the family of the alleged mastermind behind the 9/11 plot was given access to the American skies on a private jet at a time when law-abiding American citizens were banned from flying. The alleged orchestrator of the attacks had his family treated as royalty, while the United States government felt it necessary to eavesdrop on and interrogate its own citizens, despite the fact the government admits now that the 9/11 attackers were all non-Americans and lived primarily outside the United States. Yet the Bush government, in its unparalleled wisdom, saw it fit to create the Homeland Security Act and the Jesuit-crafted Patriot Act. 9/11 was a pretense for a lot of things. And you just line all the ducks up in a row, and it all makes sense. On the one hand, they put the bin Ladens in the spotlight so that they can go to war in the Caspian Sea region and justify passing all these inquisitorial laws, all under the pretense of national security. Our own government did 9/11. Our own papist government did 9/11. The question is, why? Is it really a war on terror or something more sinister? Asks the author. Several decades ago, John Lord O'Brien, former United States Attorney General for Western New York, warned of the dangers of forfeiting constitutionally granted freedoms for the promise not necessarily the guarantee of security. Here's what he said, quote, "It's an understatement to emphasize that one of the principal influences which threaten the very existence of democracy is the all-pervasive craving for security at any price. Over and over again, we have been warned against the insidious and sinister invasions of civil liberty by plausible excuses," unquote. A state or country in which citizens and visitors can be interrogated, interned, or detained without trial, without evidence, or even explanation, or have their private communications intercepted or read purely on the basis of some government agent's suspicion is a slippery slope toward high-tech totalitarianism and is a mere refinement of, listen to this, a mere refinement of the techniques of the Papal Inquisition of the Middle Ages. As the Supreme Court of Canada observed in R. versus Durante in 1990, such a police state is the kind of democracy in which liberty will eventually have no meaning. Or at least the meaning of the word liberty will change, and I will add that liberty to the papacy means the freedom to be Catholic without any Protestant interference. And that's what this is really all about. Reader, unless the signs are all misleading, the United States will soon no longer have a Protestant, I will add the word Protestant, constitutional legislative branch of government in any true sense of the term other than vestigial. For each year brings its additional level of restrictive and invasive regulations in the name of anti-terrorism, but in the bargain chip away at our Protestant, I will add the term, liberties. And when the dust finally settles, I venture to say that we will find ourselves in a world in which privacy and liberty no longer has any meaning, a world where we are a little safer perhaps, but far less free. As Brian Lilly wrote, it is only a matter of time before some would-be terrorist pledging loyalty to Al-Qaeda tries to bring down a plane by smuggling explosives in a body cavity. At that point, air travelers will be asked to take off their shoes, surrender their water bottles, step aside for the scan, and then bend over for a probing search. At that point, perhaps, the public will realize that they are surrendering their rights, their dignity, and getting little in the way of protection in return, unquote. This isn't about national security. This is about overthrowing our government. This is about overthrowing Bible-believing Protestantism and imposing in its place a Roman Catholic dictatorship and Roman Catholic state-sponsored church. Sound outrageous? History is going to vindicate. History already does vindicate if you're aware of history. Now, we're just going to get started before the end of the program. It's chapter 57. We're going to get right down to the nuts and bolts of 9/11. It's entitled 9/11, A New Pearl Harbor, or The Road to Tyranny. Begins with a quote from 33rd degree Luciferian General Douglas MacArthur, Supreme Pacific Commander during World War II and during Korea. Quote, "Upon the fields of friendly strife are sown the seeds that upon other fields, on other days, will bear the fruits of victory." I wonder for whom Douglas MacArthur prayed victory. Another quote, "For nation shall rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom." Matthew chapter 24, verse 7. And right after that, verse 8 talks about the beginning of sorrows.